Well, hello and welcome into the Beyond the Youth Room podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about missionaries versus mission field. Why are most Christian parents getting this wrong? And so if you're wondering what we're talking about, stay tuned for today's episode.
Even just going from youth ministry to adult ministry, I quickly tried to run back to youth ministry because I thought, I was like, man, this is where the action's at. This is where teenagers will live out their faith more vocally and more on mission than I've ever seen in adults.
So when you read the New Testament and when you study this, scholars are pretty much in agreement that the rest of the disciples, excluding Peter, are at least under the age of 20.
We have a tendency in our Christian culture to think that we need to disciple someone to maturity before they can start to share their faith, or before they can really live out like a ministry to serve other people. And
I can't stand this when people say, raise up your child. Because the Bible doesn't say raise, the better translation is train.
When trees are exposed to the natural environment of like wind, and, storms and everything, it actually creates microfractures as they're growing, which strengthens them. And so if we have a protective bubble over students where they can experience true growth, like through experience, then they're going to topple over.
Hey, you're homeschooled? I want you to go to a high school football game and just sit near the student section and tell me you don't leave there wanting to tell every single one of them about Jesus.
Yeah. Okay, now Ryne, let's just start off by acknowledging that we have not really hashed this out yet. We are having this live discussion.
Yes.
On our opinions, based on our experience as youth pastors, as even teenagers. That I became a Christian as a teenager. You were raised in a Christian family, and so. But yeah, just to preface everything, we were both public school students, but we don't want to just assume that this is just talking about homeschool versus public school or private school or anything like that, because we now know that homeschoolers can lead other people to the Lord, and public school students cannot lead other people to the Lord sometimes. So that's not always synonymous as this argument over homeschool versus public school. But for the sake of this argument, I think we should just share some of our background, just to help the viewership understand that. So we've shared a little bit before, but in case they're new, we're both youth pastors, and we've served in youth ministry. We have a lot of students in our ministries that are living out the gospel in tangible ways, both public school and private school and homeschool, like all of the above. And then, but we're seeing this permeating thought that you have to see your kids as parents. You have to see your kids as a mission field and not as missionaries. In fact, we'll share that in a second. Let's share our background first. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing, like when it comes to this idea, and that'll just give us a little bit of context.
Yeah. So I think it's super helpful to know that my mom grew up as a pastor's kid, faithful. My grandpa had an awesome ministry, through the day that he passed. My dad grew up in a divorced home where he wasn't raised in church. And so they got married and they were kind of finding their way, two very different home backgrounds. And so they kind of actually went to, everything has to be Christian schooled. And so they taught in a Christian school, and my older sisters were in Christian school. And even when I was younger, we were all homeschooled. And then that kind of hit the fan, and God made it clear. It's like, you don't have the right view of this. Like I have them, And so at that point, we all went into public school. And my dad is still, both my parents left teaching in a Christian school and went into the public school. My dad's still in public school in the county that I serve. My mom was a public school teacher. So this isn't just like I went to school. It was like, no, we all went to school in different contexts, different schools, different things. And then I went off to college and played, baseball at first a community college where it was a very dark place, to be quite frank. And then I finished at I'll say Christian university, because if you've been to a Christian university, you know how that works. I mean, it's the same things you see everywhere else, just maybe a little bit quieter. And so even in that, like, my family background was like, we're going to homeschool, we're going to private school. And then God had other ideas, made it clear. So then it was public school, but then I finished back in a quote Christian school environment. So I've kind of seen all of this. And from a ministry perspective, we have about a third of our kids are in homeschool or private Christian school, and the rest are public school. And so this is I've even had some conversations lately with some homeschoolers being like, we feel like everything's geared towards the public school kids, and me trying to have these conversations and even navigate a little bit of how I see this in our own ministry as well. So I'm excited to talk about it. Talk about it today.
Definitely. Yeah. So my background, I came to Christ through public school ministry. So same thing with my wife.
Yeah.
We were high school sweethearts. So we came to Christ as teenagers. And so, right away, it's not like we, switched schools or something like that,
Yeah.
and started, being homeschooled or Christian schooled or anything like that. So we were around a lot of other, non-Christian teenagers. And so we were kind of forced to live out our faith because it was like, okay, now this is public. Like we need to make sure that we're seeing ourselves as missionaries. And so, there wasn't like a lot of intentionality from our parents to disciple us spiritually. So that kind of came through our youth ministries or, through our even really friends like that were discipling us. And so with that, of course, that formed my vision or my philosophy of ministry, being a teenager myself, doing ministry. So leading a lot of my friends to the Lord and just seeing how the Lord could use someone to kind of, be used by them as a teenager. But now there's definitely a huge increase of, I think rightfully so, parents taking ownership of their kids' spiritual lives. And so I just want to make sure we're clear that, it's like when we say that your kids are, your primary ministry, like as a parent,
Absolutely.
we're not disagreeing with that at all.
No.
Like we would say like, yes, that is they are a mission field that you want to, nurture them with the love of the Lord and like bring them up into a godly home that would prioritize the word of God and to teach them, everything that you've been commanded as well and have learned how to do. So we're not saying like with children, like young children or whatever, like as they're being raised up.
Yeah.
But I think there's a permit which we're gonna quote something that we found online here that's been passed around a lot, where they would say your teenagers are still your mission field, that they shouldn't be seen as missionaries, like to be leading other people to the Lord. That's that comes from being an adult. And so there's, I think there's maybe an age distinction here that we're talking about, that we're not talking about just, young kids. Like we're not expecting a toddler, although we've seen toddlers be very vocal in their faith. Like your kids now are like,
Yep.
Well, I guess your older son, is, being vocal about his faith. Like our 5-year-old, 4-year-old, like even when our 13-year-old was younger, he was actively sharing his faith with his younger brother, and he ended up leading them to the Lord. So, so there's not to say like, oh, the Lord can't use children to lead other people to the Lord, but I think how we should view our kids and our youth ministry specifically is going to be crucial in how they spend the rest of their teenage years and how they even own their faith in the teenage years. So let me go ahead and just jump right to reading the quote that we have. I don't see it on here now. Is it?
I think you moved it.
Did I move it?
Yes.
Did I delete it? That's
you might have.
Oh man, we had a screenshot from this, but we can paraphrase it. If we don't have the
well, I mean, it was essentially, and I've seen it before too, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, where it's like, we need to stop expecting teenagers to be missionaries. They are not developed yet. They are not, they are our mission field. And in other words, our job as parents is not to unleash them to go do this. Our job as parents is to train them up in their faith.
Yep.
And obviously there's, as you said, there's some truth in there. The idea that as parents, our job is, it makes it very clear in Scripture and of course in Deuteronomy, specifically, where we are to write these words on the tablets of our hearts. We are to talk about them as we walk, as we lay down, write them on the doorposts of our homes. I mean, as parents, our primary mission field is our kids, and that's why Scripture sets that up in the qualifications of a pastor, where it's like, hey, you have to have your house in order first. That doesn't mean your kids are perfect. We could have a lot of podcast episodes about what does it mean to have your house in order.
Yeah.
But this idea that even like God sets that up where it's like, of course, like your first mission field is to your kids.
Yeah.
And so nobody would argue with that. But I think the question essentially comes in to, okay, as your son or daughter, maybe they're 13, maybe they're 14, it's like, hey, is the best way to really train them up to send them out?
Yeah.
Or is this hey, we want to make sure they know what they believe, train them up in an environment where we can control what they see and what they're exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they get to a certain age, now they are equipped, now they're ready to go do this.
Yeah.
And as youth pastors, it's definitely something that is, near and dear to our hearts, because our job is to reach teenagers with the gospel.
Absolutely.
And as we are very passionate about, and we've both understood, it's like teenagers do a much better job reaching other teenagers with the gospel than we can ever do as youth leaders.
Exactly.
And so it's almost like in a lot of parents' minds, it's this, hey, I want you to just disciple my kid. And depending on your church context, this might be different, but our very nature of our role is to reach the ones who don't know Jesus. And so on the surface, it kind of looks like this competing narrative. And I think a lot of people, it comes from a place of fear. In 2 Timothy 1:7, for I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the conversation that we want to have today is how do we as parents see that, but also how do we as youth pastors see this and kind of bring a biblical, how does the Bible lay this out very simply?
Yeah. So I just scrambled through and I found.
Yep.
So I found the direct quote because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. So we're not going to call out who posted this or anything, but we'll just quote them. So it says, "Read your New Testament. You won't find a single child serving as a missionary. Your children aren't missionaries. They are your mission field. The Bible says, raise them up, not send them out." And then another person, replied to this and said, "Tired of hearing parents say that their children are in places they shouldn't be just to be on, quote, the mission field." And when I saw that, I was a little mad. I was like, wait, I was frustrated a little bit. And I know that this does say, it says children, so, I mean, I would, I want to give credit to, to maybe someone that does believe that, for their child that's, that's first grade or whatever, yes, they shouldn't be, in a situation where we're expecting them to be missionaries when they're so, they're being influenced so much by then, they're not, always influential at that point. And so, but I would just say if this is applying to, public school or being in a situation where they're seen as missionaries, as teenagers, I would definitely disagree. And,
What
I was frustrated was by their use of the New Testament and the Bible to back that up.
Definitely have some thoughts on that. But even
So-
for that, I think with this argument, people tend to view it that way as children. But that's not really the conversation that anybody, I think, is really happening. I don't think there's many people who are saying, no, your third grader needs to go to public school to be salt and light. That's not, I mean, there might be some people saying that, but I don't think that's really a good faith argument. That's not really what's going on here. I think the conversation really gets into the early teenage years where the teenage years where they're trying to have this. And so would we agree that, just off the bat, we don't agree that our kids should be somewhere that God doesn't want them. So let's just even take that off the top.
Let's just ship them to Afghanistan right now.
It's we
share with unreached people's groups.
No, we are to spend time in prayer and God's word to discern His will for our kids. But the other thing that I would say before you even get to before you even dive into the New Testament, I can't stand this when people say, raise up your child. Because the Bible doesn't say raise, the better translation is train. And so you raise crops. What do you mean? Well, you water them, you create a good environment, you cultivate the soil, but then it just kind of happens. You make sure that you keep giving it, but no, this is talking about train. And there's a very different, mental image you get between you raise vegetables, you train soldiers. There's a very...
Or even athletes.
Correct.
In the Olympics, Paul uses the athlete as an example.
And so I think you need to understand that too, where it's raise kind of brings this we just set the environment and then it just kind of happens. And it's no, train is you are walking beside them through this. And I think that's the first thing we have to understand is our job is not to raise, a child in the way they should go. Our job is to train children in the way that should go. And that brings a whole different mental picture of how hands-on we need to be with that.
Yep. Now, full disclosure, I homeschool my kids. So, this is coming from a homeschool dad. Homeschool, can we do it?
I knew that before we had this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I want the viewers to know too that, we're not just saying that there's not a place for people to really
Correct.
take seriously what you're sending your kids to learn from,
Absolutely.
and who you're sending your kids
Absolutely.
to learn from, but also where you're sending them to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a case by case basis. We're not like, homeschool always forever, like for every kid. Like
Nope.
we're taking it year by year, and our oldest is going to be in high school next year, and we're considering, like, what does it look like? Do we go to do we send him to public school as a missionary?
Yeah.
Like, do we, or is he still formative enough to where we need to still invest in him longer?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not like a one size fits all argument, but I would just say where they might have gotten this wrong is backing it up with the New Testament, saying that teenagers cannot be missionaries.
Yeah.
Where would you say that there's some good evidence that teenagers from the New Testament could be missionaries?
So I didn't even tell you, but I have it pulled up. Keith must know me.
I don't. Yeah, I just wanted to see if you had some right off the top of your mind. But
Yes.
I do. But I just wanted to see.
Matthew 17:24. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" He asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But," verse 27, "but so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open up its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." So the temple tax was 2 drachmas,
Mm-hmm.
and all the disciples were there. And he very clearly says, "Hey, Peter, go and get 4 drachma to pay the temple tax." Well, so what's the point? Well, traditionally, the temple tax was only paid by those over the age of 20. And so when you read the New Testament and when you study this, scholars are pretty much in agreement that the rest of the disciples, excluding Peter, are at least under the age of 20. And when you understand that, now the whole New Testament fits. Peter's the only one that we're ever told is married. Peter's kind of the one given the charge of the disciples. Peter is kind of given this.
He's like the adult leader of
Yes.
the youth group.
And yes, he's the volunteer.
Jesus is the youth pastor.
And so, I mean, very simply, right off the bat, the easiest place to point to, Jesus came down and had 3 years to train up his disciples, to unleash them. And this is Matthew 17. So this is later on in the ministry. So like, this wasn't even just they were 19 when they started.
Yeah.
Jesus picked teenagers. And so right off the bat, it's like, you're missing the whole point.
Well, and also you got to realize, like, Jewish tradition and culture.
13.
13 was considered a man or a woman. Like you became an adult when you turned 13.
Yep.
And so that's why, even in Jewish culture today, like you have bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, like that's the celebration of adulthood for children.
Yeah.
And so to say, like, yes, children like in below 13 are like even in what we would consider, now we just keep extending that, so
Correct.
like we've determined that an adult in our culture is 18.
For
but our whole argument, for something, and 21 for
25
drinking, or 25
26.
to rent a car,
26 for insurance.
26 for insurance, 47 to get married now. No, I'm just kidding. But the idea is that you don't see children serving as missionaries in the sense that of, like, people under 18 in the New Testament, because children in the New Testament were under 13, 12 and under. And so you do see, though, that Jesus, if he could select anyone, chose teenagers to be his disciples. And so I think that's synonymous with the people that were in the New Testament that kind of led the charge were young people.
Yep.
And so, with a few exceptions. And so I would just say this is what made me a little upset, as far as like seeing this as like we shouldn't send our teenagers to a public school to be, to learn from them, because they are the mission field, not the missionaries. And I would say that's contrary to what we see in Scripture.
Yeah. Well, and I want to break down that fallacy even further, as we talked about too, where it's your child doesn't have to go to public school to be a missionary.
Yeah.
Like,
that was what we're going to bring up next.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody is called to be a missionary. And this is, so I've actually had this conversation with a parent before, and it wasn't, it was like a good, healthy conversation. I said, hey, can you share with me what commandments in the Bible are age specific? I said, can you share with me in the New Testament? So if we're saying go and make disciples doesn't apply to children, then what commands do apply to children? What about let no unwholesome talk come from your lips? Well, Yeah, that applies to children. It's like, okay, well, hold on. Why does that apply,
Yeah.
but not go therefore and make
Yeah.
disciples?
I mean, we do have specific ones like children obey your parents
Correct.
in the
Yeah,
Lord.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Ephesians 6:1. But yeah, but you're right. Like there's not like a disclaimer, an asterisk of
No.
like, unless you're a child.
Correct. Matthew 5, be salt and light. It's like,
Yeah.
is there an age limit where we're now salt and light? And so I think we want to break that down even further. And so this was part of the conversation I was having. This was a mom who's, have a great relationship with, like she's an awesome parent in our ministry. I mean, her and her husband both. And her daughter was in a Christian school. And so then it was like, hey, well, she's playing a sport, and we're so happy that we found a Christian team for her to play on. And so we kind of had this conversation. I said, can I ask you a question? I said, like, if we're called to go and make disciples, like, hey, when does she have that opportunity? And it's like, well, wouldn't you want your kid to play for a Christian coach? And I was like, well, yes. I said, but on the other hand, I said, if they're in a Christian school all day, which not everybody in Christian school is saved. That's a big battle to get with kids to see. But if you're a Christian school all day, and then you go play for a Christian sports team, and then again, not to generalize, but then you go and work at Chick-fil-A in a quote Christian environment. It's like, what is all this training for? And that's what I think we want to break down even further. It's no, you don't need to send your kid to a public school to be a missionary, but your kid is called to be a missionary. Now, again, my 2-year-old son, am I going to send him out, door knocking? No. Like there's things here. Every child is different, but at the same time, there is no age requirement on, things in the New Testament. You won't find it. And I think that's, you have to at least see that where it's not this or this. It's no, they are called to be missionaries, and we are called to train them in the way they should go. How do these work together?
Well, I think also too, it's a crucial thing to remember. Like we have a tendency in our Christian culture to think that we need to disciple someone to maturity before they can start to share their faith, or before they can really live out a ministry to serve other people. And I would say like there's stages and stuff that you can walk them through, like as far as mature stages. We've talked about this before about the 4-chair discipleship model. Like we have non-believers, believers, you have workers, and then you have disciple makers. So we don't want to go from 0 to 100 like the first day, but what we often see is that students that are new in their faith are the most vocal about their faith because they're so excited about Jesus saving them, and they want to tell everybody that they know because they love him. And so to not squash that, would say, no, you're just a child, or no, like you've only been a Christian for a few weeks, so you can't share it with other people. Like, so we emphasize, like, if you know enough to believe, you know enough to share. And there's a really good, it's like it's based on a sermon that he gave. It's a little booklet that they created, the Navigators, off of Dawson Trotman. It's called Born to Reproduce. And he talks about like that idea of disciple making, like to make disciples who make disciples. And what he brings up in there, he compares it to physical maturity. That like there's a reason why young kids can't have babies. Like they're just not full. They're not developed enough, to where. And so he's like, there is a certain level of maturity that you have to understand to make another disciple, spiritually as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we want to make sure that it's not restrictive, to where we're saying, no, you can't because of your age. Even a little bit different context, because a lot of people use this as a teenager verse, but most likely Timothy was probably in his early 30s. But the big like 1 Timothy 4:12, like the youth ministry verse, like do not let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for
Sorry
other
for
believers.
those of you, your youth ministry is named 412 ministry.
And so, but anyways, regardless though, I think that principle still applies to young people, even though Timothy wasn't a teenager. That we can say, like we've seen that teenagers can lead the way for revival, not just learn from the experts that are adults, which usually aren't. In fact, like even just going from youth ministry to adult ministry, I quickly tried to run back to youth ministry because I thought, I was like, man, this is where the action's at. Like this is where teenagers will live out their faith more vocally and more on mission than I've ever seen in adults. And so all my practical experience, all my biblical knowledge points to the opposite of what this person had said, that children shouldn't be seen as, and I say caveat, teenagers shouldn't be seen as missionaries. I think that's misleading.
Well, and there's this thought of like, we can protect them from this stuff. Like that, I think that's the main thought, is like, we need to protect them from this so that they can mature. And it's like, you don't mature by protecting them. You know, I'm going to use the example that Todd has shared on the Warriors Walk podcast. Well, why don't you share it, because you've heard it more
so
times.
the biodome experiment, where they actually created like a whole ecosystem inside of a biodome, like they created this huge dome and tried to grow everything. And what they noticed, and they couldn't figure it out, is that trees would get into a certain height and then they would just fall over. So they wouldn't like be able to grow trees more than like, you know, a certain amount of feet. I think it was like 10 or 12 feet or something like that. And so then they realized that when trees are exposed to the natural environment of like wind and, you know, storms and everything, it actually creates microfractures as they're growing, which strengthens them. And so if we have a protective bubble over students where they can't experience true growth, like through experience, then they're going to topple over. And we've seen this too, like where there's been Christian students that are raised in the faith, that they get off on their own in college where they can make their own decisions, and they're like, what happened? Like they just went off the deep end spiritually. It's like, I mean, that if you don't give them that decision making muscle while they're still under your like, you know, so use the middle school, high school years as a protective net where they can still fail, but under your supervision and under your, you know, where you can actually teach them how to you know, course correct. And so,
Yeah, and so my own analogy, I went to a JV football game, okay? There's one team, it's like, they can't tackle. And so I go and talk to the kid, it's like, do you guys practice? He's like, well, you don't understand, like, we just try to put a team together. We're getting kids who've never tackled before in their life. And so it's like, they've never done this, and now we're throwing them into competition saying, now it's time to do this. And it's like, I don't know how to do this. And I think it doesn't just do damage. Well, I want to be very clear, because I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound blunt, but this is what I actually said with this conversation with this other person. I said, okay. So I said, we want our kid to be in a Christian school. Yeah. Okay. We want our kid to play on a Christian sports team. Yeah. Okay. We want our kid to have Christian friends. Yeah. Now, I'm not disagreeing with any of those three things. I said, so then what are we saying to the neighbor next door who's not a Christian? I said, if we do this, I said, we're just a club. We're just creating a club that we're literally telling, and this is where it sounds really harsh, but when you read the New Testament, when I read the New Testament, this is what I see. We're literally telling everybody else, hey, you can go to hell. I really don't care. Like, I'm focused on myself. And I don't say that flippantly as in, but I mean sincerely. It's like, if they don't hear the gospel, they will die and go to hell. And so that's the urgency that we talk about all the time. It's like, that's what we need to have, where it's like, I need to make sure that you have a testimony and witness so that you can share the gospel, so that you can say, follow me as I follow Christ. But at the same time, if I'm just focused on my, you know, inner circle, my friends, my church, and I never view outside, well, then I miss, you know, the idea of Jesus looked on the crowds and had compassion. Versus if we never look on the crowds, we're never going to have compassion. And that's why I challenge kids. It's like, hey, you're homeschooled. I want you to go to a high school football game and just sit near the student section and tell me you don't leave there wanting to tell every single one of them about Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I see, because I was raised in this idea, not by my parents, but it was just kind of the cultural context. Like, everything was apologetics. We're going to make sure that you can defend your faith, defend your faith, defend your faith. And then I got to a point where I was like, nobody's attacking my faith. And it was like, because I wasn't around people who, you know, really cared, or were even asking questions. And so I think that's where I kind of had that shift of like, so I was kind of trained for all this stuff, and I'm like ready. And it's like, no, they're not coming after me, because the devil's fine if I'm not doing anything, you know? And that's kind of how I
think of like too, it's like, you're not aware of the needs that you're not aware of. And so if you're just, you know, putting your head in the sand like an ostrich type of, you know, moment, like where you're just like, you're just not around people. And this could be applied to people that are in public school. Absolutely. They have blinders on. They're like, they're not even involved with anything because they, you know, they just want to be in a Christian bubble or whatever. But that's why we even for our boys that are homeschooled, like we mandate that they do some kind of activity where they're rubbing elbows with other non-believers, like that they, you know, so whether it's martial arts or baseball or, you know, other sports activities, so that we don't just create this ecosystem of no growth, because there's no microfractures, there's no resistance, there's no, you know, wind to kind of shake them up a little bit to say like, wow, like there are people that don't know Jesus. So even when I take Hudson, my oldest son, out, you know, we do like a, you know, the Go Share Day every month, and I take him with me. Doesn't always like volunteer, but I take him with me. And one of the things like as takeaway as we're like processing afterwards is like, I just didn't realize like how many people don't know Jesus, you know, like, cause he's just around, you know, the church culture and he, you know, it's just like, man, every time I come out here, it's like, man, there's a lot of people that they're just hopeless. Like they don't know the Lord. And it's like, it's good. It's good for them to see that, just to realize like, no, there's tremendous need in our world. And if we just bury our hand, you know, head in the sand and say, no, we're just going to focus on protecting the ones that we have, I think we miss out on an opportunity.
Yeah. And to do due diligence, we want to be clear as well. If you're sending your kid into a place where you know there's a spiritual battle going on, which let me be clear, there's a spiritual battle going on for your kid. But if you are sending them into a place, I hate using the word, like I hate using public school as an example, because again, we get this view of like public school bad, like homeschool my kid good. And it's like, no, like your kid has sin nature. They need Jesus and they have to walk in sanctification. But if I do send my sons to public school, I will need to know, hey, I need to spend serious time with them, just like I would homeschool or things like that. But I'm now saying 7 hours of their day, 5 days a week, I am not going to be with them. So now I need to be super intentional about the time I have with them and having conversations and saying, look, the moment that you're not open and honest with us, like we're going to reevaluate everything. If they do go to public school and stuff, but it's like, you need to be able to create an environment where you have the pulse of your child to know what's going on. And
so in other words, like, don't just, unleash them and say, hey, good luck.
Yes.
You know, it's like, no, we're still a very active role in our kids' lives as parents, you know, to disciple them, and regardless of where they are, you know, what school they're going to. But I think to say from scripture that there's no expectation from teenagers, I was like, you're just missing the opportunity there. And like Jesus chose just, you know, teenagers as disciples. So yeah. All right. Well, as we close, anything else you want to add to this discussion?
Yeah, just one more thing quickly. You need to be aware that when you're having this conversation with a parent about their student, it's not really about their student. Like, you're having this conversation with the parent who is viewing that way, because I can go down all through, and the ones who have sent their kids in public school and just completely unleashed them with no training, it's like the parent's spiritual walk normally is not, it matches. And conversely, when the kids don't have any opportunities around non-believers, most likely when you look at the parents' lives, they're not pursuing relationships with non-believers. And so don't miss that part where you might be having a conversation or seeing this about the kid. And in reality, a lot of times as parents, it helps us kind of make ourselves feel better. If it's like, well, my mission field is just my kids. And it's like, yeah, but what about everybody else? And it's like, well, my kids shouldn't be. And I'm like, no, I'm not talking about your kids. Like, what about you? And so I think understand that a lot of time we're not really having the conversation about the kids. We're kind of having the conversation with the parents.
Now, if only there was like some training that could be used to equip students to be missionaries to their setting.
Yeah.
You know? So do you have a suggestions on that?
Yes, we actually just released our new student missionary training. We've had it before. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You know this,
well,
but
based on the feedback that we shortened it a little bit, made it more concise.
Yep.
Very, very impactful.
Yep.
Where can they find it?
So they can find that in the description below. They can also find that in our school resource community. Everything's free in there. They can click that description below. But you can also go to edgeclub.org/training, and you will find it there as well. You can sign up to play it for your students. And I'd encourage you, tell parents, hey, watch this with your student. And if you're having a conversation with a parent who doesn't know how to share the gospel, nothing in there is
universal. So it's not like it's just towards students. I mean, you could use the
geared
same
towards
method,
students, but the
same method to share the
principles are the
gospel with
same.
everybody. Very cool. Well, that concludes another episode. Hope you guys have enjoyed the content. If you are enjoying our content, we'd love for you to share with other people that would benefit from it. We are trying to impact 1,000 youth leaders and then also train 10,000 students with our student missionary training this school year. And so if you want to participate in that, again, go to edgeclub.org/training, and you can download and access that all for free. We have generous donors that support the ministry so that all of our resources are free. So you can check that out. All right. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.